Go Buckeyes! Okay, just had to say that. All right, heredity. Let's look at this. We're talking about meiosis. We're moving on to heredity. Heredity is refers to the transmission of traits from one generation to the next by inheriting DNA from the parent for asexual reproduction or parents for sexual reproduction. So, obviously, humans sexually reproduce, and so we're passing that those traits from the parent to the offspring. Parent to the offspring. All right. Um, Genetics is the science that deals with the transmission of information in the form of DNA. So we're transferring that information. It can range from studying how traits are passed from generation to the next using something as simple as Punnett squares or identifying DNA segments, what we call genes, and the proteins or enzymes that they make. So it's a huge field of science. There's a lot of different things involved with genetics. And so we can't just say it's just one thing. So now, what I can say though is that this field has had a tremendous impact on society as a whole. Um, it, we've talked many times about things like very sweet and large strawberries, and they're so yummy, but they've been genetically modified. So our food, cloning, medicines, making bacteria and yeast to make human hormones, to make biological weapons such as the super anthrax. I mean, all kinds of things are genetically are involved with genetics. Now, when we talk about genetics, um, it can, I mean, certainly it can be a great thing. I mean, we could do great things with our understanding of genetics. We can also do really bad things. Knowledge is always good, but sometimes what people do with it is a problem. So, um, just something to keep in mind. So when we look at a gene, this is a gene itself is a unit of hereditary information that's in the form of a DNA sequence of nucleotides. So after we see so many nucleotides together, that's what a gene is. Most genes will code for some type of protein or an enzyme. It's what's called the $1 million blueprint. Wouldn't that be great to have $1 million? I don't know what I would do with $1 million. I would travel. Yeah. So it would be like the blueprint for making a steering wheel. So think about it this way. The school's made up a bunch of blocks, cinder blocks. A single block is a single nucleotide. A group of blocks that make something functional is a gene. And so that would be like a room. So if we put a bunch of the blocks together, then we have my classroom. And that would be a gene. So one block is a nucleotide. A classroom would be like a gene. And then the whole school would be the chromosome. And then there are many different rooms within a school, just like there are many different genes on a chromosome. That's a good example, isn't it? I think that'll help. All right, so we're still on this slide. Mom and dad's DNA's, their contribution. The egg is surrounded, that's sperm all around that egg, and only one's getting in, if one even gets in. All right, so let's look at the genome of a human female. So this, when we're looking at this is called a karyotype, and all of this is all the genetic information for a female. And you can tell because there's two X's here and there's not a Y chromosome. So this genome refers to an organism's entire genetic makeup. All the DNA within a cell, it would be like the blueprint for making the whole functioning car instead of just the steering wheel. So half of the DNA is going to come from the mother. Half is represented by the letter N. Okay, that letter is going to be important. The other half of the DNA comes from the father, which is another N. So therefore, a half plus a half equals 2 halves, which is equal to 1 organism. So N plus N equals 2N. So half is also called the haploid. Sometimes it's called the monoploid, but really we call it haploid. And 2 halves is called diploid. Okay, so as in terms of genetics, we need halves, not wholes, in order to make an organism. And we're going to look at that in a little more detail. All right, so we get half from the father, half, so here's our N, half from the mother. Half, that N is in the sperm, and the other N from the mother is in the egg. All right, so when we're referring to something called a locus, not like a locust with a T at the end, which is a bug, even though these look like bugs, well, they're insects, they're fruit flies. But all right, so a locus is a location, just kind of like what it sounds like. Locus, location. It's the location of a gene on a chromosome, so a particular part. So this is very important when you're talking about an autosome versus a sex chromosome. So back to here, these are all autosomes. These are all what's called somatic cells. All of these except these right here. The X and Y are the sex cells, and they're specifically designed to determine the sex of the organism. All the rest of these are called autosomes. Oh, and the puppy is needing something, probably a kiss, no doubt. All right, can you hear him crying over there? Puppy kisses. Okay. All right. All right. So, all right, let's move on down. Oh, so let me just point out a couple things though. So these are some gene locations on here. So if we're talking about wild type versus mutant fruit flies, that's going to be at this locus right here. Right here at 48.5, it's going to determine whether it has a gray body or a black body. At 57.5 determines red eyes or cinnabar eyes. 67 normal wings or vestigial wings. And then 104.5, these sound like radio stations. Okay, maybe not. All right, so is determining red eyes or brown eyes. All right, so let's look at asexual versus sexual reproduction. So two different types of reproduction. Asexual reproduction involves only one parent. Parent is producing genetic clones of itself. It's making an exact copy. The parent and offspring are 100% identical in terms of DNA content and DNA nucleotide sequence. All right, so now benefits of asexual reproduction. Reproduction can occur very quickly. Now, this is very good when you're taking over a new area. You want that reproduction to happen fast. It's a very simple process. You only need one parent. There's no like seeking out the other, finding them, courtship, all that stuff that goes with it. It just, it's wonderful. Now, the risks is that every organism is the same. So when we talked about variability before and why that's important, if one organism gets a disease, they are all affected. It's going to affect all of them because they're exactly the same. So you don't have some that are resistant to it and others that are not. So there is no variation. This is what caused the Irish potato famine, by the way. Potatoes are originally from South America. One species of potato plant was taken to Ireland. This became the only species that farmers could plant, as no new species were brought over afterwards. So you had this pathogenic fungus called potato blight that began attacking the plants. Since they were all alike in terms of DNA, because they were clones, the fungus wiped all of them out very quickly and caused the famine to occur. And so You could see the benefit is reproduction is going to happen very quickly. It's very easy to happen because you only need one parent, but the risk is very high. One damaging disease or pathogen and everything's gone. All right, with sexual reproduction, this is going to involve two parents that contribute to the DNA. So the huge benefit is this creates variety. Look at these two parents, and then even though both these daughters look similar, they're not exact copies. And same thing here. Here's the parent, and then their children. Their children are not only exact copy with each other, but they're not an exact copy of the parent. And obviously, this is very important in terms of survival in the environment. The benefits, again, produces variability. And this is why some organisms have advantages over other organisms. And for example, the woolly mammoth, those that have less hair survived and passed on those genes for less hair to their offspring as the environment became warmer. If you're covered in hair and it suddenly now gets warmer out, whew, well, game over. So ultimately we end up with our modern elephant that has hair on it, but it's not covered in hair. So the mammoths with more hair died before they could reproduce, thereby wiping out the genes that eventually caused the extinction, of the old species. Now, of course, there's risks involved with it too. It takes two to be able to reproduce, and they must be of the opposite sex for physical reproduction to occur. So you can't have two of the same sex together. It's not going to work. So it's not good for an endangered species if there's not very many of you out there. Well, then suddenly now this is not going to work out so good. So it takes more time. It also involves a more complicated process to create the gametes that have half of the DNA content. So it's a much more involved process and not necessarily, it's certainly not going to be as fast as asexual reproduction. So, you just never know what you're going to get. All right, that's all we have for tonight's show, and go Bucks!